like to welcome Ramiro Lobo, the farm advisor from the University of California Extension Office in San Diego. And he's going to talk to us about coffee. Ramiro, thank you for being here and take it away.
I'm going to turn my video on just for the beginning. My internet connection is a little bit unstable. So, hi guys, pleasure to be here. I'm Ramiro Lobo, farm advisor in San Diego County. I have about 22 years on the job. My specific role is small farms and agricultural economics, where I do program research and extension programs to benefit small-scale growers in San Diego County. And primarily looking at for management, ag-econ related marketing research, new crop evaluation and assessment research, market development, and food safety, and and really just about any other things that growers come up, growers have questions about, because attrition has hit us really heavily down in San Diego County, and we only have 2 advisors in our office these days. So it's a bit of a challenge, but hopefully we'll repopulate the office and things are going to get better. I'm originally from Honduras. Grew up in, family had a small coffee farm, but for the most part, our main, my dad, and it's makes a living in the cattle business. It's sort of I tell him a sustainable farmer nowadays, although when he started that term didn't exist, but he does a little bit of everything, but mostly cattle, dual purpose cattle. We milk cows and then we sell the steers and cull animals for beef. Also grow crops, cotton. We've grown cotton, corn, and like I said, there's been a history of coffee in our family. And I personally have my wife and I own a coffee farm in Honduras as well that we're trying to develop and hopefully into a profitable business sometime. That's the 20-year plan. Okay, about today's talk, as an overview, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some facts and about the coffee industry worldwide and about the U.S. industry as well. A little bit on coffee and COVID-19, how that has impacted the industry. A little bit on taxonomy, genetics, and types. About coffee production in the U.S., how it is coffee got started as a quote unquote as an alternative crop for small scale, well, for farmers in California. Told you a little bit about what research we've done to date and what we intend to do from this point forward. Some results, I'll share some results and observations that have sort of a guide our recommendations in terms of how to grow it here in the state. And then some summary and conclusions. How many of you have tried to grow coffee? Give me or have a coffee plant at home, thumbs up or down. All right, Bruce has got some. Anyone else? Larry? With what degree of success, Bruce? Oh, your mic is muted.
Well, at my previous location, I grew a couple of coffee trees and I was getting fruit. In Malibu, I'm just starting over now for coffee. Okay.
And Larry, how about you? What's the story?
I've got one plant that's several years old. It's basically neglected under a tree, and I get a few coffee beans every once in a while.
All right. Have you been able to brew a cup of Jack out of it?
Once.
Cup of Joe?
I tried it once.
All right. How was it?
It was okay.
Good, good. Okay. Well, hopefully with some of the newer varieties, and Jenny has obviously gotten some seedlings of some of the varieties that we're trying to grow here in Southern California, and hopefully those will work with you. And with the experiences of others who have attempted to do it, and some quite successfully, hopefully you'll be able to get more coffee out of your plants. Okay, coffee production in the world. You know, coffee is grown in the tropical belt, really. You know, I mean, in Africa, tropical America, and then Southeast Asia. As you can see here, the darker color spots are countries that grow primarily Robusta or Canephora as a species, and the rest of then the yellow one grow primarily Arabica, and the pale green grow a combination of both Arabica and Robusta. In terms of top producing country, by far Brazil is the #1 country. I mean, they produce you know, 60 million sacks of coffee, and sacks is about you know, 65 kilograms of coffee per sack. Then Vietnam also follows Brazil, but it's a distant second. Then Colombia, Indonesia, and Honduras. The interesting thing is, if you look at Arabica production, Colombia is second to Brazil, and then sort of the order shifts a little bit, but you know, it's still Brazil is the top dog. And as a matter of fact, commodity coffee is quoted in the New York Stock Exchange under a SIC contract, which is primarily developed to market Brazilian coffee. And there is a lot of discontent in the rest of the coffee producing world, because they feel that the C market or the C contract does not represent the coffee that is grown in other areas like Colombia and Central America and other South American countries, because it is more of a high altitude coffee, better quality coffee, as opposed to lowland and lower elevation coffee that is almost industrialized in Brazil. As far as the size of the industry, it is a big industry. I mean, it is more than 100 billion annually, and in terms of, it's the second commodity to oil as the world's most traded commodity. 5 billion cups of coffee are drank daily, and 14 billion of those are espressos. Coffee farms support 25 million people worldwide in producing countries in Asia, Africa, South and Central America, and the Caribbean. 67% of world coffee production is grown in America. I mean, in the Americas. Finland is the heaviest drinking coffee country per capita. The US ranks 25th per capita, but is the largest consumer in volume. Coffee shops are one of the fastest growing niche segment in the restaurant business at 7% annual growth rate. 90% of world coffee is grown in developing countries, but it's consumed in industrialized countries. So kind of a north-south thing here. Fair trade coffee, although it is a small portion of the market, is the most popular fair trade commodity within that particular label, and it does, you know, add a premium to coffee prices in developing producing countries. 37 coffee producing countries listed in World Wildlife Funds as the countries with the highest deforestation rates. And that's sort of a debatable point, because, I mean, some people argue that, yeah, you cut some trees, but you plant coffee, so you sort of replace the quote unquote, you know, original forest with a coffee forest, is you grow shade coffee. Some other trends, consumption is increasing in producing countries, and this is a strategy that they try to develop to increase consumption and also improve prices at origin. Brazil is about to replace the US as the single largest coffee consuming market with 24 million bags. Top 5 importing countries: France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the US. And they accounted for about 51 million bags, which is a significant amount. On and on, a retail value is 48 billion. Brazil, Vietnam, and Colombia account for most coffee exported to the US. In terms of consumption, American consumers, or most consumers, perceive the coffee, 55% of them perceive the coffee they consume as a specialty. And that's why, you know, specialty coffee is sort of there's some definitional issues there. Coffee provides 75% of America's caffeine, and the U.S. largest buyer with 27.5 million bags. And this is old data, but still, U.S. buys more coffee than anyone else. We'll kind of skip through this. Okay, coffee and COVID. COVID had impacted the coffee industry significantly, mainly not because it decreased consumption, but it shifted the consumption patterns among consumers, among coffee drinkers. For example, consumption overall increased 8% in the US since January of 2020, and 85% of drinkers had at least one cup of coffee at home. And this increased more than 10% since 2017. In terms of away from home preparation, and this means coffee that is consumed away from home, we saw a 55% decline of coffee consumption in the workplace. And that's understandable because most people were in the US, a significant number were working remotely. Same decline, although minor or a smaller decline at convenience stores and gas station, quick service restaurant, full service restaurant, so a 50% decline. So that gave origin to a renewed interest in coffee and preparation at home and roasting it and the whole experience of buying green coffee and preparing it yourselves. 48% of Americans are already returning to their favorite coffee shops or plan to in the next month. And this is based on, April, May data when this report came out. In terms of how people consume their coffee, top preparation methods include the drip coffee using a drip, single cup systems, a 10% light cold brewing, which is one of the growing trends in coffee consumption, and about 8% like the instant and ready to drink coffee. Most people drink their coffee with breakfast, and I would say about 6 in 10 use milk or other alternatives with coffee, and some with sugar. There is a saying in coffee producing world that a good coffee doesn't need sugar, and a bad coffee doesn't deserve it. So, you know, it's one of those things that, but you drink it with, whichever way you like, right? Okay, in terms of taxonomy and genetics, coffee is in the Rubiaceae family, or which is the same as the madder family. There are about 450 genera and 6,500 species identified worldwide. The plant itself, leaves are undivided, simple, and they grow in pairs opposite each other, usually near a lateral bud or shoot. The coffee, the buds, and this is something that we'll talk later because it's something that is kind of a challenge here in California because the buds, flower buds, develop at the axis of where the leaves are. And sometimes because of weather conditions, those buds can be either flowers or shoots. And here we see that because of the seasonality and the weather effect, plants get confused, and you get a lot of coffee tends to. In the native growing habitat, they tend to be really sort of organizing how they grow. They grow vertical, have lateral branches. As they get older, and if you don't manage them, depending on the variety, they'll keep growing vertical, and production will be always in the newer branches, right, in the newer laterals. But as you manage it and tip off the plants, those plants will start growing sublateral branches. So, you will see perpendicular branches on the laterals, and that's where coffee will be grown. They always grow coffee on the newer tissue, if you will, in the newer wood. The plants have both male and female organs, and according to the literature, 90% of the coffee flowers are pollinated before they open. So that leaves 10% variability that is sort of responsible for some of the numerous varieties that have been selected in the pretty much naturally, or mutations that have occurred naturally over the in coffee producing country, and that have been identified and developed as more productive or resistant varieties. So within the genus of coffee, there is about 100 to 120 species identified, but there are only 3 that are commercially relevant. Those are the arabica, the eugenioides, and the canephora. The arabica, it's pretty much originated in Ethiopia and South Sudan, and that includes all the species for what's known as arabica coffee. Eugenioides is native to the highlands of East Africa, and the important thing about this is it's one of the 2 parents of arabica, but has a lower caffeine content. Canephora is what we know as Robusta coffee, and this is native to Western and Central Sub-Saharan Africa, and is the other parent of the original arabica coffee. Very productive, much higher caffeine content, harsher flavor, and we'll talk more about that later. And then Liberica, which is another genus and species that is little commercial value in terms of coffee production, but it has some ornamental value because the plants are large leaves and really good, nice looking. So in terms of where coffee started, as the map shows, let's see if I can turn my pointer here. A laser. Okay, the Arabica started in Kenya, Ethiopia, then moved to Yemen. From Yemen was moved to India, and then part of it went to Java, Reunion Island, and other from India went to Europe, to Holland with the spice trade, and from there went to the Caribbean, and from India it also came to Brazil, and from Brazil went to Hawaii, and then also from Guatemala there are some lines that went to Hawaii as well. So what's known as Kona coffee, I think it's a Guatemala typical line that came from Guatemala, but develops some sort of a unique flavor in Hawaii because of the terroir that made it really identifiable as that. So when we talk about Arabica versus Robusta, what are some of the main differences? Primarily is the taste. Arabica has a better flavor than Robusta. As a matter of fact, the Arabica coffees tend to be very smooth, soft, with higher acidity, lower caffeine content. Some of the higher end, I mean, the best rated or most, what's considered the best varieties in the world, which is like a geisha or a typica or varieties like that. When you brew them, it's almost like an infusion. Coffee tends to be very light. That doesn't look like the dark coffee that you get from a Robusta. So it's very smooth flavor, and which comes from having a lesser caffeine content. Robusta has about 3% caffeine versus Arabica with 1%. Lipid and sugar content, Arabica has about 60% more lipids and almost twice as much sugar than Robusta. So that's why it's a sweeter flavor. And the flavor on the Arabicas is enhanced by, well, on both species can be enhanced by processing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. In terms of price, the Arabica sells for about twice as much as the Robusta coffee. And the interesting thing is that most espresso recipes contain a significant part of Robusta coffee, you know, as high as 80%. That's why espressos tend to be really dark and strong. In terms of care and maintenance, Robustas are much stronger plants. I mean, resistant to, primarily they are resistant to leaf rust, which is a main problem in coffee producing countries, and to nematodes. The plant height and bean shape also are different. Robusta tend to be smaller and rounder beans versus the Arabica, that depending on the variety, they will have a more elongated bean, you know, once you, and it's a narrower, longer bean. And we'll have some photos of that as well. As far as the plant height, Arabicas, typically around 2.5 to 4.5 meters. Robusta can get, as big as a tree. Chlorogenic acid content or antioxidant activity have some insect deterrent effect, much higher in Robusta than Arabica. Cultivation, Arabica accounts for 75% of world coffee production versus 25% of Robusta, with Brazil and Vietnam being the main producers. When we look at Arabica, and then there are two main lines here, which is the typical line and then the Bourbon line. They are both indigenous to Ethiopia and taken to Yemen, and then from there, they spread all over the world. Typical coffee is known today. Originated from plants that were taken from Yemen to Java and some of the neighboring islands. Bourbon lines originated from plants that were taken to the island of Bourbon, which is now known as Reunion Island. So these two cultivars or original lines, constitute the basis for most coffee varieties that are cultivated pretty much worldwide. In terms of volume, although some of the original Ethiopian lines are gaining a lot of popularity because of the quality of and flavor, and they've been winning cupping competitions pretty much all over the world, and so we'll talk about them a little bit. A lot of hybrids are grown today. These are natural, many of these are natural selections or mutations that occur in coffee selected out of primarily out of Bourbon, but also some crosses that were made with the Timor hybrid, primarily to infuse resistant to leaf rust in coffee in some of the Bourbon or typical lines. And we'll discuss that a little bit later. A second, what's going on? Okay. So when we talk about varieties, cultivars, or hybrids, a variety is a taxonomic rank that is is just below the species and or subspecies. And these are plants that are very uniform, very stable, and share many common characteristics. Cultivars, these are plants that were selected for specific characteristics that look attractive and that can be maintained through propagation. A lot of these have come out of cultivated coffee, in commercial coffee farms, and a few have been selected, especially out of wild coffee in origin, in Africa primarily. When we talk about hybrids, this is offspring resulting from breeding of two genetically distinct individuals or two different species, like the Arabica Robusta crosses that we're going to talk about. And there is a higher degree of heterozygosity here. So in summary, this is kind of what's happened with coffee. Follow me here. We have the eugenioids and canephora are the parents of Arabica or Ethiopian coffee. These lines that you see in green was considered Ethiopian or Sudan accessions, and have pretty much remained the same throughout. These are high quality, tend to be lower productive plants, but produce a higher quality coffee, very little resistance to diseases, but they are gaining a lot of popularity. For example, the geisha line, geisha variety has been winning cupping competitions pretty much all over the world. And that's why, it's been selling as high as $1,200 a pound in international auction, and that is for the winner of the Best of Panama competition. And in Central America, it's won cupping competitions pretty much in every Central American country. So we have this group of varieties out of the Arabica. Then we have out of the typical line, the Yemen accession, and then we have the that was Typica and Bourbon. On the Typica, we have some lines that are grown, like I mentioned before, like the Cona, Guatemala, the Pluma Hidalgo, which is a typical line in Mexico, Villa Lobos is Costa Rica, Pacheco Moon, Guatemala, Blue Mountain is a typical line that has been labeled as such in Jamaica, and then others in Brazil, like the Java that came out of Sumatra, Maragogipe. And then these are, if you look at the Bourbon line, we have a lot of mutations that have been selected out of this. And some of the varieties like Caturra, that used to be the staple of the coffee industry pretty much in Latin America up until the early 80s, when when leaf rust became a major problem and really annihilated all coffee production. Villasarchi is a popular variety in Costa Rica. Mayagüez is another Bourbon line out of Puerto Rico. Pacas is a line out of El Salvador. Laurina, the interesting thing about Laurina is that it's considered a low caffeine variety. So for people who like the caffeinated coffee, this is somewhat of an alternative for that. And then mutations of Bourbon, we've got, or crosses with some of these. We got Mundo Novo, which is a hybrid between these two, or Pacamara, which is a hybrid between Pacas and Maragogipe, and Catuai, that is a mutation of Bourbon as well. So enter the hybrid from Timor, and in trying to find a resistant to leaf rust, some of these varieties, these lines of Bourbon, were crossed with the Timor hybrid. There are two lines, really. Some were crossed with Caturra, Timor hybrid times Caturra, and that gave origin to a line of hybrids called Catimors. And these Catimors are what's pretty much most of the kind of what's being grown in producing countries, really. You know, Iapar 59, then Pira, Café 90, Colombia, Catronic. All these materials went to different producing countries, and in every country they sort of gave them a name. The other cross that they made, the hybrid from Timor, was crossed with a variety called Villasarchi, and that gave origin to a new line, to another set of hybrids that are called Sarchimors, and that includes varieties that those are not listed here, but well, I think Ovata is one of those. But we have Parainema, which is one of the varieties that you have in the seedlings I gave you. Marsellesa, Iapar 59, Iapar 59, Tupi. Those I think those are Sarchimors. And then that hybrid from Timor was crossed with yellow Caturra, and that gave origin to varieties that are grown in Colombia, like the Colombia and Castillo, which used to be the main varieties in Colombia, but now they have some other newer varieties that have been coming out. So that's sort of the what's happened over the last 2,000 years in terms of coffee breeding. A lot of it naturally, and then a lot of it on purpose. Like the crosses with the Timor hybrid, this happened, I think, in the 40s. And that was when this new set of hybrids came out. So this is pretty much what's grown in coffee producing countries. So the question then, I mean, do these hybrids have enough Arabica in them to be called Arabicas? And most geneticists argue that, yeah, they do they insert the breeding, and then they do back crosses to sort of reinsert the Arabica genes to get the flavor to them. But some of these varieties these hybrids are very productive, but not necessarily great quality coffee. So that's the thing that the balance that growers are finding out now. As an example, you know, if you look at a geisha variety, that one of these varieties can produce you in a natural habitat about 7-8 pounds of coffee per plant, and a geisha variety, so holding everything else content, will get you about half of that at its highest peak. So you get the quality, but you don't get the productivity, and also you don't get the resistance to leaf rust, which is pretty much the driving factor here. Although there are other pests and diseases that are impactful as well. Okay. I'll just go down through, I mean, these are just varieties so that you can, I mean, if you're recording this, I can share the presentation as well if you have a question about where X variety came from. Also, you may want to go to one website that you got to visit is World Coffee Research. And I think the URL is going to be in some slides that I will show down a little bit ahead. But World Coffee Research has a variety catalog that is pretty much the most comprehensive catalog for coffee varieties in the world. And then not only old varieties, new varieties, some F1 varieties that they are promoting. And they have a lot of research going on in terms of varieties, pretty much global research. Bourbon cultivars, again, you know, just a long list of varieties, Typica, Bourbon crosses, Timor hybrid. So, speaking of the Timor hybrid, this was a naturally occurring cross between Canephora and arabica that occurs on the island of Timor in Southeast Asia. These are known as Arabusta hybrids, and primarily it's, well, because of arabica and robusta, and naturally they had natural resistance to leaf rust, and their popularity increased in the 1950s. Different lines of these have been used in breeding programs to introduce rust resistance, and as I mentioned earlier, these are the three main groups of varieties that came out: the Catimors, which are the Caturra crossed with Timor hybrid, Sarchimors, Via Sarchi with Timor hybrid, and Colombia is Yellow Caturra with Timor hybrid. So more cultivars, these are all hybrids that came out of with some Timor hybrid genes, if you will. Then you have the Ethiopian and Sudanese varieties. And of these, probably Geisha is the most cultivated, and the area cultivated increases daily because, as I mentioned, they've been winning cupping competitions and selling at absolutely ridiculous prices, like $1,200 a pound. So the plant structure, as I mentioned, the plant grows vertical. It's got one main trunk. As it grows, it produces lateral branches. When you grow it commercially, when you manage it, you tip your plants at about 170 just to kind of encourage more lateral growth and to keep your coffee lower to make it easier to harvest. Plants that reach a maximum height of 180 or about 6 feet are considered dwarf. Those that make it up to 220, 225 are considered semi-dwarf, like the center here. And then the plants that exceed 3 meters are considered tall. And that also makes a difference in terms of variety selection when you're planting some of these. The taller plants, like the Typicas and the Ethiopian varieties, tend to be lankier. You know, the angle of the branches is less pronounced than the Arabica or dwarf plants that are really compact and fuller, if you will. So for house plants, I would say the dwarf and semi-dwarf plants makes a better plant because of how they look. They look fuller and you know, beautiful foliage as well. I'll just go down through this list. All this information is coming out of, I'll talk about the first one because this is out of World Coffee Research, as I mentioned before. So they have the variety, the Typica, in this case, they give you an indicator of quality, rating, the yield potential, the plant structure, whether dwarf or tall, optimum altitude. They rate them by susceptibility to leaf rust, susceptibility to nematodes, susceptibility to coffee berry disease, and how precocious they are when you plant them. And as I mentioned, these Typicas or Ethiopian lines tend to be slow growers. They take much longer to produce than some of the Bourbons or the hybrids. In terms of nutrition requirement, medium, the bean size, they tend to be large. and the color of the tip of the shoots are bronze. So this is what you'll find in World Coffee Research for pretty much every variety. I'll just go down the list here. These are our nursery plants at South Coast Field Station in Irvine. From about 2017 is when we had this nursery there. Bourbon, and this is a Robusta. We had some Robusta plants. They tend to be really big. Some distinguishing characteristics of the Robusta is the leaves are huge and the ribs are really pronounced. But they tend to be much bigger. You can see how big the leaves are on these plants and how robust the plant look. I guess that's why the name Robusta, right? Catuai, a variety from Brazil. Pacamara, and some of these you have in the seedlings that I gave you. So some are very good quality with high yield potential. So that's one of the reasons we selected some of these. Caturra, y Café 90. See, this is a hybrid, and as you can see here, the quality potential is very low, but the yield potential is very high, which is something that I mentioned before. Lempira, pretty much the same scenario, although a little better quality. Parainema is another hybrid with decent quality and also decent yield potential. The interesting thing is this variety here is resistant to nematodes and has some resistance to leaf rust as well. Icatu, this is another Robusta, and pretty good variety as well, one of the newer varieties. So, coffee production in the US, I bet you guys were waiting for this. Production in the US is pretty much limited. The commercial production has been limited to to Hawaii. But lately, there has been sort of a buzz about growing coffee commercially in California. And so there are a few commercial growers that are trying to make a go of it, primarily in Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, down to San Diego County, and I think in the San Diego Riverside boundary as well. We think it's got great potential. Some potential, I would say, the jury is still out for coffee as a commercial crop because of a number of factors. Establishment cost, it's pretty significant. Because the cost of plants has been pretty high, from some of the nurseries that have been selling plants for commercial growing. We do think, though, it's got great potential as a house plant. I mean, this is a beautiful plant. It's relatively easy maintenance, easy care, and you can grow them indoor, outdoor, in the soil, in pots. So that's why we think the ornamental value is probably, or ornamental potential is better than, I would say, the commercial. But again, don't tell that to a Californian because they will prove you wrong. We've seen that with a bunch of different crops that were not necessarily grown in California, and now California is sort of the top producing state in the U.S. and in some cases is the top producer in the world. So, show you some photos here of some plants. Martha is a grower in Huntington Beach, and that's her coffee plant, unknown variety, but looking, because of the characteristics, I think is either a Caturra or a Catuai. And she's been harvesting a lot of coffee out of that plant. So there are some successful experiences, as a home grower, the beautiful plant, nice, big, she's processes coffee, that's coffee that have been pulped. By that, I mean the pulp, the rind. See, you harvest it in the red stage here, and this is what you get once you pulp it. And from here, we'll talk about the processing later on, but she's kind of a successful story about growing coffee. Commercially, there is a company called Fringe Coffee, and Fringe is pretty much, it used to be known as, well, they still, Jay Roski is the person in the photo here. He owns a farm called Woodland Organics up in Santa Barbara, And he's pretty much responsible for the buzz about commercially grown coffee in California. They now become French coffee, and French is sort of a collaborative of coffee growers in Southern California that get technical assistance and support from Ye and his team as French. So their plan is to grow coffee as an understory crop to avocados, or in association with avocados, as you can see in the photo here on the lower left. Avocados, generally speaking, are not necessarily good as a shade tree for coffee because they tend to grow low. And coffee, you have, for good shade for coffee, the canopy has to be at least 2 meters or about 6 to 7 feet clear of the top of the coffee canopy, so that you get good air circulation and flow, and that and you don't want coffee to be shaded. You want light to be filtered through, not necessarily shaded. So they have some successful efforts to grow coffee like this. And the photo with the white cloth is how they get them established. They create there is a chicken wire cage inside this cloth, and then that's how they get them established to survive the winter weather. And as the plants get older, they do become a little bit more acclimated and more tolerant to temperature. French is, as I mentioned, they have a network of growers. We haven't done any work with French. They tend to be very close in terms of how they do things. And so because of but the good thing is they created a lot of interest. And for you to play with French, you got to follow pretty much the technical specs, if you will, in terms of how to grow it and all of those things. As part of the university, we are doing some research to kind of help people who want to play with coffee and not necessarily be part of French. So for people who want to do it independently. And so we're trying to learn about the coffee, perhaps trying out different production methods or models that what they are doing. And it's somewhat of parallel to what they're doing. So this is what's going on with them. And that's pretty much the story with was pretty much all I know about French and what they are doing. But they are processing coffee, so they are a commercial operation as of now. They offer advice and process the coffee for some of the growers that participate with their program. So climatic requirements: coffee is an understory crop. They require partial shade. Temperature range from 59 to 75 Fahrenheit or 15 to 24 Celsius. They like humidity. And one of the things is they like well-defined rainy and dry season. They like humidity, but coffee can withstand somewhat extended periods of drought. And that is something that we will be looking at in terms of research, because one of the problems we see here is that coffee is continued. You get blooms pretty much year round on coffee, or a long bloom season. And primarily because we grow it with irrigation. So we'll probably look at water stress as a management tool to see if we can trick the plant and concentrate to have a more compact bloom so that we have a more compact harvest season, because labor is extremely expensive. So they like protection from wind. Freezing temperatures will kill them. If you have extended temperature below freezing, periods below freezing, your plants will die. And I'll show you some photos. But if it is a quick dip into below freezing, they will be fine and bounce back. And part of the reason where you are, I would probably recommend you protect them and then or grow them in pots where you can move them in and out into some protected spaces if freezing weather is a risk. They take the heat very well. They take dry weather, you know, like I said, in Central America, they withstand periods of drought from, you know, or no rain for, you know, 6 weeks, 2 months. And you look at the plants and leaves are, you know, wilted, and you think that they are dead. And then all of a sudden you get a rain and the plants just explode with blooms, you know, usually in the spring. Arabica coffee grows better between 1,800 to 3,600 feet, whereas Robusta is maxes out at about 3,000 feet. Robusta is less tolerant to colder weather than Arabica is. That's why Robusta is considered lowland coffee, and that's the reason it grows really well in the lowlands of Vietnam and Southeast Asia, and some of the lowlands of Brazil as well, in the plains of Brazil. Propagation commonly done by seed, and we had some, you know, a small amount of seed. I think I offered. I talked to who was the person I met with. I had offered Typica seedlings, but I realized I didn't have any seedlings. But I did offer a few seeds of Typica if there's any interest in you guys growing from seed. You select seeds, seed selection. I mean, for commercial farming, you want the best quality seeds, so you only collect seeds from the center third of the plant and really ripe, big, you know, average size of beans. You don't want the biggest or the smallest. You avoid some defective seeds like triangles or pea berries, and we'll talk a little bit about each one of, you know, those later on, or maybe in the future. Seeds take about 45 to 60 days to germinate. You put them in, we grow them in pretty much any mix, but anything with sand or perlite or vermiculite will be better. And what you don't want in your seed beds is any rocks or pebbles or like big pieces of perlite, because if the root hits it, it will get bent, and those plants tend to not work out well once you transplant them. So at 40 days, they germinate and start emerging. And as you can see on the left here, these are what's called a soldier stage or a match, light match stage. And you can transplant them at this stage. The plants will be okay. Matter of fact, some people prefer to do it this early because they think the stress is less harmful when the plants are this young as opposed to when they are this big, which is called the chapola or chapa stage, which is, you know, with the two cotyledons coming out of the seeds. These are our seeding trays at South Coast, and this is our seedlings, you know, pretty much ready to be transplanted into nursery liners or pots. This is what we did with some of the varieties. The plants in the center here, these are tissue culture plants, which is something that the World Coffee Research is doing to ensure the consistency and true to type on some of the varieties that are coming out. Some of the challenges that they are seeing is that the root system tend to be really weak with tissue culture plants. Coffee can be propagated by cuttings as well, but that practice is almost always used only with Robusta coffees. And the other aspect of it is that because of the growth habits, the plants that are propagated through tissue culture tend to not have enough vertical vigor. They tend to grow low and spread out as opposed to growing vertical. And that has something to do with I guess where the tissue is taken out. So they are encouraging or trying to do it more with the apical meristem so that you have that vertical vigor, you know, when they culture these plants. The center photo is what I was talking about, root defects. You don't want any plants that have any bend on the roots or anything like a bifurcated root or brushy or this. You want a root system, a root that is really straight. And that's why, you know, when I took the seedlings to you guys, I didn't select them. And that's what I recommended to the lady I gave the plants, that as you go through the plant, select the ones that have this straight root system. And the longest the root system, the better. So this is kind of what we're looking for: long, clean, straight root. These are defective, and this is kind of how we plant it. You know, we use nursery liners primarily, you know, because of the cost, but you can put them in 1 liter pots and then repot them, and the plants do well. And that way, you know, you kind of grow them and let the root system grow, the root ball, and then put them into a bigger pot or take them out to the field if that's what you're going to do with them. But this is kind of what we're looking for in terms of root systems. All of this would be considered defective and will be discarded. Again, this is our nursery and some of the varieties we have, and some of the varieties we gave you guys, we made available to you. Nursery plants, you want to start acclimating your plants under partial shade. This is a lath house that is at 50% shade. And it's sort of a quality selection, quality from the start. You know, you select good seed, which obviously we don't have a choice here, but then you select good plants with the strong stem and straight roots. And then when you take them to the nursery, still there's going to be some plant loss, and you select the strongest plants, the one that show the most vigor, and then you repot them, you know, every 2 years maybe, if you're going to keep them in pots. Or at this stage, you can put them out in the field. If this is this is about 6 months after seeding them, after you start with the seed. So you go 45, 60 days to germinate, about 75 days before you transplant them, and then you know, at 6 months you want them at that stage you put them in a liner, and then you take them out and put them in a bigger pot, and then plan to repot them every 2 years, or take them out and put them in the ground if that's what you're going to do as well. Watering, they like water and they like high humidity. So in terms of whether you grow them in the soil or in pots, you got to do it by field pretty much. You know, the water requirements here is not something that is well understood, but and we'll be doing some research on that in the near future. But coffee roots are very fibrous and shallow, so higher frequency is better than deeper, less frequent irrigations. The other thing is overhead irrigation could be used to keep the plants clean. I mean, because they tend to accumulate dust, and that way you keep them clean and you stimulate bud development. In the winter, you probably want to reduce the amount of water applied if they are in the soil or in pots. And what you want to do is to kind of stress them a little bit, and hopefully that'll, as I mentioned before, concentrate the bloom in the spring. They will tell you, you know, when they need water. Like tomatoes, you know, they tend to wilt when they are getting dry. However, they will take you know, longer periods without water than you would expect. Foliar sprays, if you have them you know, if it is an indoor plant, just get a spray bottle and spray them regularly, just to keep that foliage lush and green, and they will make you a nice, beautiful plant. In terms of fertilizer during establishment, pretty much you only need nitrogen and phosphorus, and any combination or something similar to 18-46-0 3 or 4 times a year. When the plants are in the nursery liners or in 1 gallon pots, you want to put just a pinch of fertilizer kind of away in the pot, but not necessarily in direct contact with the root. You don't want to burn it. So you want to kind of get a pinch of fertilizer and then pretty much push it into the ground. So when you water, that fertilizer doesn't float and gets in contact with the root. And do it every you know, every other month when you're in the liners, and pretty much the same frequency as you grow your plants. So once your plants are established, 2-3 years that you get good foliage, good volume, you want to start applying more of a complete formula because the potassium is needed for coffee bean production. Again, smaller quantities with higher frequency is better than larger amounts. Coffee responds great to foliar spray, so you can have a fertilizer solution, with some of the common fertilizers, Bud & Bloom or Grow More or anything like that, and just kind of do a spray, have a very light fertilizer solution, and your plants will love it. Then you will get a beautiful foliage with them. Flowers and flowering. Flowers tend to be small, but they're really scented. I mean, you get a jasmine scent out of them. Really, when the plants are blooming, it is such a nice, pleasant smell that you almost want to make a tea out of them. And in fact, you can. They have about 5 white petals, depending on the variety. They tend to be shorter and wide or skinny and long. I mean, Typica or Ethiopian varieties tend to have the longer and skinnier petals, and they grow in clusters. As I mentioned, at the base of the leaves, as you can see here, you can get as many as 20 flowers, and depending on the variety and the growth habit of the variety, they will all open up at once, or you may have different waves. And I'll show you some photos where we have like flowers, coffee already formed, tiny coffee beans, and how it comes in, usually 3 or 4 flushes, depending on weather and variety. Flowers are self-fertile. They are self-pollinating, and as I mentioned, 90% of them are pollinated by the time they open. Robusta flowers, on the other hand, are self-infertile, and they need to be cross-pollinated to produce coffee. That's why in Brazil, you have to, or in Robusta producing countries, you got to have 2 different Robusta plants or lines of Robusta to successfully grow Robusta coffee. Both varieties take about 9 to 11 months from bloom to harvest. This will depend on altitude and temperature and climatic conditions, pretty much. But so here we are now blooming, which is similar to what's going on in South America in terms of bloom, and but we get flowers for pretty much year round in some of the varieties as well. So harvesting is done by hand, and selectively you pick the ripe cherries. Mixing green cherries with your ripe cherries affects the quality of the coffee, or it's not cost effective because the green cherries are not. I mean, in commercial operations, I mean, you won't have that problem with homegrown coffee, but they tend to kind of negatively affect or how can I say it? They don't make the milling process effective because the green coffee goes through the milling, and it just makes it more expensive to clean out the coffee, the parchment coffee coming out of the milling machines. Processing and storage. This is another thing that is kind of interesting and that affects the quality. There are primarily 3 ways to process coffee. You go through a wet process, a honey process, or a natural pulp, or a dry or natural process. I'll start with the dry or natural because this is the oldest way to process coffee. This is how they did it in Africa many years ago when they started growing coffee, and this is still how they do it pretty much. So they dry the coffee in something, the structure that is called an African bed. And coffee that is processed naturally, it tends to have a fruity flavor, really smooth, sweet, and more flavorful coffee. I mean, to the point that I'm not necessarily too crazy about it. At the opposite end is the wet process. That this involves you remove the outer skin of the coffee of the fruit, and then you end up with the coffee bean that is encapsulated in a parchment, but it's got a mucilage that you have to break down and remove before you dry it. So at the end of the day, the coffee, you pulp it, you let it ferment for 8 to 24 hours, 10 to 24 hours, depending on the altitude and weather, and or whether you're doing it mechanically. And then that mucilage that will break off, the proteins or will break down, and then that you can rinse it with water. You stir it up, and all that mucilage will come out, and you will end up with a clean parchment coffee that then you can dry, and that'll give you a cleaner cup. The honey or pulp coffee it's you dry the coffee with the mucilage on. You just remove the pulp, and this is sort of an intermediate step between the two. How are we doing with time? I mean, I didn't ask you how long we have for the talk, or the conversation, so I don't know. So coffee processing. This is coffee that I picked from my plants here in Irvine. This is I actually use this this cereal grinder to run these cherries through. And this is a parchment coffee. I had a photo of the red cherry. Actually, it was a video. That's why I didn't put it on. And this, I removed the pulp, and then I end up with this. This, I let it sit for 12 hours or overnight, and then I remove this mucilage and end up with parchment coffee, which is this here on the right. So you start with follow the cycle here: flowers, mature coffee, then you end up with this. This is a parchment coffee, which is this coffee minus the mucilage, but already dried. And then you remove the shell. That is a very cellulosic shell that isn't here, called parchment, and that gives you the green coffee. And the green coffee is what we roast to then grind and make our coffee whichever way we want. So this little grinder here, you can use to remove to pulp the coffee. Once you dry the coffee into this parchment here, you can run it through, which is what I was doing here, to remove that parchment. And then you use air just to blow the shell off, and you end up with the green coffee here. Once you roast it, I use the same grinder to get to this point here. So very handy cereal grinder here, $25 to $40. And you can do all things to process your coffee at home with that one tool. This is kind of something similar what I was saying, the African beds, where you dry the coffee in the natural stage, just as it comes off the plant. If most people would probably rinse it and remove floats and dried coffee cherries that come in with the harvest, and you dry this. So this is called a natural processed coffee. This is a pulping machine, and this is what you get once you remove the pulp, what you can see here on the top photo. And one way to tell when the coffee is ready to be washed is that to tell that the mucilage is broken down is here. If you insert a stick and take it out, the coffee beans will collapse and fill the hole. Once the mucilage loses that viscosity, then you stick your finger, if you have your coffee in a pail or something, or the handle of a ladle or what have you, and then the hole will remain intact. That tells you the coffee is ready to be washed. So this is washed, and the mucilage will come off. So once this is the result of these three different processing methods. This is the same variety. This is a washed coffee. This is a honey processed coffee. This is a pulp and washed coffee. This is a pulp coffee that was dried with the mucilage on, and this is a natural coffee, meaning that it was dried with the skin on, nothing done to it. As it was dried as it came off the plant. So what you have here, a very clean tasting cup, no flavor, pretty much the flavor of the variety. Here you get a sweeter, fuller, fruitier cup, and here a little bit higher, you know, more fruit flavor, almost like a wine tasting, like a prune flavor to it. So this is what you get, because all those sugars that are removed with this process are encapsulated and transferred to the bean. So this is the Parainema, one of the varieties you have. This is Icatu, and this is also Parainema again. So different varieties will have different amounts of mucilage, and so the color of the honey processed coffee can be either as a black, what's called a black honey, or a golden honey, which tends to be when the mucilage is lighter, lighter quantities of mucilage on the beans. So what we've done today, what we wanted to do, you know, once we knew about the interesting coffee, we wanted to develop and document coffee production practices for small-scale growers in Southern California. We wanted to look at varieties to see what potential they had for commercial production under organic conditions and conventional conditions. And then develop coffee growing information for home backyard growers, for indoor or potted plants or soil-grown plants, and evaluate coffee varieties and practices under controlled and semi-controlled environments. So what we, these materials and methods, 13 varieties, field trials established in 2017 at Cal Poly and South Coast. And then in 2018, we established another little trial at the flower fields here in Carlsbad, San Diego County. We also had what we call the citizen science project, which is similar to what we, with the plants that we're making available with you guys, where we made plants available to master gardeners because they are located all over the county here in San Diego. So we wanted to see how they did with the plants and then sort of get some feedback in terms of what varieties we work for them or not, and how, you know, when they bloom and all that kind of information. We were collecting data, trunk diameter, plant height, canopy size, and also climatic data to kind of look at the different, to assess the tolerance or sensitivity to wind, heat, cold, stress, and other factors that are related to climatic conditions. So variety trial at Cal Poly Pomona, field grown, irrigated, drip irrigation, 2 drippers per, each dripper puts 2 gallons per hour, randomized. Unfortunately, we got kind of one of the coldest spots on the campus near a citrus orchard. And plants were growing really well. I mean, they took off after transplanting. I mean, there were some problems with salt in the water. You know, plants were getting burned a little bit, but they recovered nicely. And as you can see, they were pushing growth significantly. We planted them in the spring of 2017. This is August. This is October. So the plants were taking off really well. Some data that we took, you know, just go through it real quick. And again, you know, 2 photos of August and October. And then this is January of 2018. And as you can see, we had some freezing weather, and this is what happened to the plants. They, all of them suffer, you know, frost damage. And so we lost most of them. Consequent to this, we relocated the trial to a higher place, and that's still ongoing. This is an observation trial I had at South Coast Fuel Station in Irvine, 5 plants per variety, 3 feet apart. Again, the variety is pretty much the same scenario as we saw at Cal Poly. These are August, September, you know, of 2017 when they were planted. This is the fall of that same year, and or heading into winter. And these are adjacent to blueberries. So this is my blueberry trial here in the front. So you can tell, I guess only in California you see blueberries and coffee grown together, right? And this is the, again, late fall, early winter. And this is what happened after the winter, with some of the varieties. Some varieties took the cold weather better than others. Typicas, we lost them all. Lempira, we lost them all. Icatu, Pacamara, Parainema, Catura, they survived the weather. Mind you, I did not protect these plants at all. We did not protect them at either location. We wanted to see, it was survival of the fittest. We didn't sink to them. We just put them out there, neglected them equally, and just to get a feel for how they would take the weather at South Coast. Based on this, I would say that protecting the plants during establishment is almost a requirement. I don't know if doing it individually is a way to go. I figure if you're going to grow coffee or have any intention of growing coffee in a semi, or for house plants, you can put them in pots and put them in areas that are protected within your backyard. If you have any intention of doing it commercially, I would say probably better off setting up a hoop house or something that you can give it more protection collectively as opposed to individually. We also did a variety trial, replicated trial under a Chirimoya grove at the research station. These plants were also planted in the same season, spring of 2017. However, Chirimoyas are a terrible shade tree for coffee. They pretty much didn't let any sunlight filter through. And the plants didn't die, but they didn't grow. This is the fall of the, summer of that year. They didn't push any growth at all. As a matter of fact, we, and the other part of it is that because this is an unfunded project, we were sort of piggybacking on the irrigation system or irrigation regime for the Chirimoyas. And probably the plants didn't get enough water. But all in all, I think the shade was the most detrimental aspect of it. So under full shade, I wouldn't recommend it. Chirimoya is not good shade for coffee. So we actually dug all those plants out, and now we're growing some of them in pots, and I'll show them to you later. Citizen science. These are photos that I got from several people. We got master gardeners we gave plants to. As I mentioned, some of them grew them in pots, some of them grew them in the soil. This is more of a Catuai Catura type. This is one of the hybrids, and this is a Typica. As I mentioned, the Typicas tend to be lankier, more open. They don't look as full as some of the Bourbon lines or the hybrids. So challenges for growing coffee in California. Establishment. You gotta protect your plants during establishment. If you're doing it for your house plants, I would probably say put them, grow them in pots and put them, move them in and out during the colder time of the year as well. The other challenge that I see is that our plants get too crowded, and that has to do with the response to the environment. The plants get confused. They don't know whether to bloom or to send shoots. So we end up with plants that have a lot of growth, when you don't want it. This picture doesn't do a good service to what I'm trying to say, but I'll show you one later on. There is a lot of little shoots coming out of here where at this stage, this is a plant from 2017. It's probably for one of the survivors in our observation trial in Irvine. And as you can see, also it is staked because the wind was knocking them down all the time. But this is another coffee plant here. This is a Catura. I believe this is either a Parainema or a Pacamara. So they survived the weather in Irvine. But again, they get so confused. You could see this plant, the west side and the east side is night and day in terms of how they get blasted by the Santa Anas. But the thing is, they survived, without any protection whatsoever. So if we protected these plants, with control the environment a little bit, I think we would have much better results. Another problem we're seeing is mealybugs. And associated problem is ants, or whichever way you look at it, either ants or mealybugs. But this is a problem because they tend to to affect the plants, and it's a problem in the nursery. And talking to some commercial growers here in San Diego, they are seeing a lot of problem in the field as well. So it's one of the projects that we're going to start looking at to find some control alternatives for mealybugs and ants, as a pest management issue. The issue of unwanted growth is something that we'll have to see what varieties follow suit in terms of regular growth pattern, because or pruning, because pruning these plants will be extremely expensive. I would say probably canopy management. You want to thin them out to get more light into it, because getting the coffee out of these plants is really difficult. They get, as I say, they get too crowded. So this is where we are today. A lot of these plants are the ones that I rescued from my variety trial under the cherry moyas. And these is, 15-gallon pots. Some of them are in, in 5-gallon pots, and they are working okay. So I would say, at least if you want to grow plants long-term, put them in a 15-gallon pot. And this is very close spacing. This is in a lath house with 50% shade, but, they are liking it, and this is coffee plants, coffee berries that are form already. And some of them have ripe coffee on them as well. So this is, as I was telling you, different waves. See, this is almost fully developed cherry. These are sort of in between. And then we have another third wave here, of another bloom. So we got 3 blooms in this photo here. But it can be done successfully. The mix we're using, this is pretty much a mix of, Sunshine number 2, not that I want to endorse it. But I would probably add a little bit more of a kind of organic matter as well, a little bit coarser mulch, if you will. The challenge with those is that they tend to set. So you may want to, find a mix. And what I like about the Sunshine is that it holds moisture really well, and it doesn't rot. So it's it provides a nice environment for your coffee plants. Other problems, just for information purposes, we don't have any of this here yet. I mean, we don't have any coffee leaf rust. We don't have any berry disease, bacterial blights, nematodes. I mean, we have nematodes in some of our soils, native soils. So nematodes may be an issue. And so if you have nematodes, varieties like Parainema that have some tolerance to it would probably be more beneficial. Coffee borer, we don't have it, and hopefully we don't get it. Other insects that affect coffee in the producing countries is stem borers, leaf miners, mealybugs. We already talked about them. Scales, we haven't really seen any problem with them. And so yeah. So in summary, this is, again, more on the commercial side, but given the current demand, there is potential for commercial coffee production in California, I would say. If somebody can do it successfully, go to a farmer's market, and try to vertically integrate and grow it, process it, sell it. Tourism aspect of it, I think, has got a lot of opportunity as well, as they do in Hawaii. I bet you some of you have gone to Hawaii and tour a coffee farm, and if you were, or gone through the tour and roasting aspect, where you come home with $18 bag of 4 ounces of coffee, but you roasted it yourself and come home really proud of what you did, right? So there is potential along those lines as well. In general, plants adapt well to growing conditions in Southern California. That site selection and/or protection is critical during the establishment phase. California grown coffee has got to be of the highest quality to sell at the premium prices that you need for profitability. Variety selection, cultural practices, processing methods, and post-harvest handling are critical. Given our weather, though, I think we can cut on the cost significantly, because I think we can process coffee naturally here without any problems, because coffee would dry without any risk of getting fermented or anything, because it is a dry environment. So that would eliminate the pulping and the washing, and also will be really friendly to the environment, because we would be not generating any mucilage or coffee. What's called honey water is the byproduct that comes from washing coffee, and that's very contaminant, to the environment, especially when you have running water to water bodies in producing countries. That shouldn't be an issue here, but it's something that we won't be using water, and we know water is kind of pricey here in the States. So more research is needed to help small scale growers or home growers, or to learn more about coffee. And this is, where we want to make plants available for people to experiment with and try it out and see how, what works for them. And hopefully we'll create some sort of an information loop that we can exchange knowledge and information. What next? We've got ongoing trials in collaboration with Cal Poly on the Cal Poly campus. We're doing also collaborating with Whittier College in Pomona. Another trial at the Flower Fields in Carlsbad, and we still have the observation trial both in the field at South Coast Field Station, and then in a semi-controlled environment in the Lath House at South Coast as well. Also collaborating with a nursery for coffee plant production for ornamental use, trying to sell them as house plants through some of the box store like Home Depot or some of the bigger retail nurseries, and continue with our citizen science project, like work with master gardeners or rare fruit growers, and hopefully we'll all get to enjoy a nice cup of coffee someday. That's pretty much all I have. I know I probably took a lot longer than expected. I don't know. Never gave me a time frame, Kathy, so I didn't know what to go for. Okay. But any questions you may have, please. Yes. That's my contact info, and be glad to.
Thank you so much. That's excellent talk. We do have questions in the chat. Do you have access to the chat to look at them, or do you want me to read them to you?
If you can read them, that way we can record the question.
Okay. Okay. The first question is, what variety of coffee is Kona coffee?
As I mentioned, we think that Kona is a typical line that was taken from Guatemala originally. But there is like wine, terroir has a lot of influence on flavor, of coffee flavors, and we think that the coffee that particular line of Typica develops a unique flavor because of the volcanic soils of Kona, where it's grown.
Thank you. Another question is regarding roasting. How are the natural cherries with the skins on roasted versus the washed beans?
Oh, well, regardless of how you process the cherries, at the end of the day, what you end up roasting is green coffee. So you got to remove that skin, even if you dry it naturally. And I'll go back to that photo here, if you wait.
How difficult is it to remove the dried cherry skins?
Well, it's the same. I mean, the grinder that I show you, if you're doing it for home consumption, I mean, processing coffee at home. See, these are coffees processed differently. This is a washed honey and natural. All of these, you can run them through the grinder that I was mentioning to get the green coffee. So regardless whether you process it using any washed honey or a natural, you'll end up with what you end up roasting is this, the green coffee that is here. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I'm not in presentation mode anymore, but I'll show it to you in a second. Hold on.
That grinder just removes the skin. It doesn't damage the coffee beans.
Well, you know, that is part of the challenge. I mean, with this, what you do is you calibrate, you separate the plates here so that the bean, the parchment coffee can be broken down. The shell is very brittle. It'll crack and separate from the coffee. As a matter of fact, it's almost separated, but it's encapsulated in the green coffee. So once you run it through these plates here to this grinder, as you can see here, there is a lot of shells and a lot of green coffee. So you just kind of blow the shells, the parchment off, and you'll end up with green coffee like this here. And this is what you roast. Whether you process the coffee as a washed, a honey, or a natural, this is what you end up roasting.
Is there any market for the cherries?
You mean as a fruit?
As a fruit.
I have jokingly told people, I mean, the flavor is sort of an acquired taste. You know, it's because of the mucilage and the caffeine, it's sort of a unique flavor to it. But in this crazy world, I jokingly told people, you know, we can sell probably, you know, chocolate dipped coffee cherries. I mean, I don't know, just kind of as a joke, but some people may actually, you know, I actually like to pop one in my mouth and just kind of get the juice out of it and kind of lick the mucilage off until I end up with a parchment coffee, because it is sweet, but it's got like enough flavor to it, you know. Like I said, it's an acquired taste. But this is what you roast, the green coffee, regardless of what method you use to process it. How would you get here? It's, you know, you can get through washing it, through as a honey or a natural, but this is what you will end up roasting. Any other question, Kathy?
Yes. What soil mix do you use for 15-gallon pots?
As I mentioned, I've because of uniformity and the fact that it's got a lot of peat moss and perlite, I go with the sunshine mix. I mean, I use the number 2, but any of the mixes in that line, I think or similar mixes will do well. It's if you want to blend it, you can add more organic matter, more of a coarser probably mix, just to add a little bit more body to it. But the thing is, the more organic matter you add, wood-based organic matter, your mix will set, and then you'll have to continually add mix to it. You know, and even the sunshine mix also tends to settle a little bit, but not as much as when I use a lot of grass clippings or you know or composted mulches like those coming of recycling centers.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions to add? If so, you can unmic and just ask them. Otherwise, go ahead.
What variety of coffee seedlings will you be making available to the CRFG members?
Oh, it's kind of I had 10 varieties. I thought I had Typica, but I didn't have any seedlings. I do have seed of Typica, and if anyone is interested, you know, I told who's the person that I gave the plants to? It escapes my mind.
My name's Trish.
Trish, okay. Then I told Trish that I had some seeds that I could make available if anybody wanted to try out, you know, germinate them and grow them, because I don't have any seedlings. But I had, as far as varieties, we had Parainema, Pacamara, Catuai, Caturra, y Café 90, Via Sarchi, Icatu, Lempira, and I'm missing 2 here. Catuai amarillo or yellow catuai, And I think we also had, what was the other one? Paranema already said. Obata is the other one. And those are all, you know, pretty good varieties, quality-wise, that some of them produce better, you know, crop than other, but in terms of growth habits, they're pretty vigorous. They are all really good plants. Anything else?
Fantastic. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, well, one of the things that we did with the CRFG group in Irvine before the pandemic, we did I had coffee samples, you know, same variety, process, 3 different ways. So we did an exercise of tasting the varieties, the same variety as a natural, as a honey, and as a washed coffee, just for people to kind of see the differences in flavor that you get. And out of that exercise, it's kind of a fun exercise. We can do it across varieties or across processing methods as well. And out of that little exercise, most people prefer the honey version of it with a variety called Catuai. And so it's kind of fun.
There's a tremendous variation in preparation of the coffee beans from the fruit all the way up to the grinding.
Oh, totally.
Roasting and everything else. Any suggestions on that? Best ways to roast for home growers?
You know, it's in terms of growing coffee and the processing, it's kind of crazy, Bruce, the way things are going. A lot of fermentation processes are being used, trying to enhance flavor. I mean, they are going, which I don't know if those processing methods will have any leg in terms of volume, but for as a home grower, you can experiment with all of these. I mean, there is like aerobic fermentation, anaerobic fermentation, carbonic maceration, acetic fermentation. Some people are adding whey to the coffee to get some of that lactic fermentation, if you will. And
those
so that's only
all those
on the cherries
with the cherries.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay.
And then they pulp it. And then that's where you start with, or dry it naturally, you know, whichever way you prefer to process it. Either you pulp it and dry it as a honey, or you dry it naturally. Then on the, there isn't much to do once you get to the dry coffee. Really, there isn't much you can do except, you know, what grind or what roasting profile you use. Whether you go light, the lighter the roasting profile, I think the more true to the variety is going to be. You're going to get more of the intrinsic flavor of that variety. As you go darker, you're still burning some of those oils and flavors, and then it's just kind of it loses that, you know, native flavors of the variety. But yeah, you can go from very light roast to a really dark roast that, you know, in the French or Italian roast, if you will, that is almost burnt coffee. And then how you grind it, whether it is a coarse grind or a fine grind, depending on how you're going to brew it, you know, whether you're going to use a French press or an espresso machine or a V60 or a air press. I mean, there are so many things that can, you know, affect the taste of the cup, you know, that you ended up drinking.
Thank you.
Any other question or comments, Kathy?
Nope, I think we got them all. Thank you so much for this excellent, excellent talk. We've learned so much.
My pleasure. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. Okay.
And please keep us, you know, keep us informed about how your coffee plants do. You know, we'd love to hear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We certainly will.
And if you guys come up with any questions as you start growing them, please feel free to email me or call my cell phone number, and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Happy coffee growing, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.